He slammed his phone face down on the table so hard that the coffee jumped in the cup. 10 words. That was all she sent. Something came up. Sorry. Rain check. 10 words to cancel 2 weeks of quiet, embarrassing hope. 10 words after he'd ironed a flannel shirt. Nobody irons flannel stood in his bathroom mirror fixing his collar, put on the cologne his 8-year-old daughter had picked out with her own allowance money. He was still sitting there, alone, at a table for two. That's when the door opened, and a woman in a coat that cost more than his truck payment walked straight across the room and sat down in the empty chair across from him. No introduction, no explanation. Just, is this seat taken? He had no idea who she was. He had no idea she was worth over $1 billion. He had no idea that the man she'd been waiting for had just done him the biggest favor of his life. He just said, "It's a free country," and immediately regretted it. Stay till the end. You'll understand why that empty seat changed everything. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? The text message arrived at 7:38 p.m. Daniel Harris read it once, read it again, set the phone face down on the vinyl tabletop so hard the coffee sloshed in the mug. 10 words. Hey, something came up at work. Really sorry. Rain check. 10 words. That was it. 2 weeks of quietly, embarrassingly allowing himself to hope, and Sandra had distilled the whole thing down to 10 words and a question mark that's somehow made it worse. Like she wasn't even sure about the rain check. Like that part was optional too. He picked the phone back up, set it down again, picked it up, set it down. Harlow's Diner hummed around him the way it had hummed for 40 years. Red vinyl booths cracked at the seams, fluorescent lighting that turned everything the color of old newspaper, a pie case up front with 3 kinds rotating on a lazy Susan that squeaked every full revolution. Daniel had been coming here since he was 9 years old, sitting on this same side of this same booth while his father ate pot roast and explained things to him in the slow, patient way his father explained everything. The booth hadn't changed. The squeaking pie case hadn't changed. The smell of burnt coffee and something sweet underneath it hadn't changed. Daniel had ironed a flannel shirt for this. That was the part his brain kept snagging on. Not the stood-up part. Not the 10 words. The flannel shirt. He'd stood in his bathroom at 6:15 with the ironing board out, pressing the collar flat, with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for engine diagnostics, because he had wanted to get this right. Because his friend Stephen had sworn up and down that Amanda was great, that she'd laughed when Stephen described Daniel, that she'd asked what he looked like and then said, "Danny, it's exactly what I need right now." Nobody ironed flannel. Daniel knew that. He had ironed it anyway, and now he was sitting alone at a table for two in Harlow's Diner, in a shirt that smelled faintly of steam, watching the pie case make its slow revolution, and thinking that the really embarrassing part wasn't the being stood up. It was that he'd let himself get excited about it. 3 years of locked doors and heads down, and it's fine. I've got Lily. I've got the job. That's enough for a man. And then one phone call from Stephen saying she asked about you. Man, she actually asked. And something had cracked open just slightly. Just enough for Hope to get a finger in the door. Hope was the problem. Hope was always the problem. Patty came around the far end of the counter with a coffee pot and the expression of a woman who had seen everything twice and still chose to show up every morning. Somewhere in her mid-50s, hair pulled back, shoes worn flat at the heel. She set a fresh mug down without being asked and swept the old cold one away in the same motion, efficient as weather. "You need anything else, son?" Daniel looked up at her. His mother had raised him to be kind to people who were working, no matter the condition of his own night. "Just the check when you get a chance. Kitchen's still open. Got a pot roast special tonight. Does it fix getting stood up?" Patty winced. Not performed sympathy. The real kind, the kind that lived in the face. "That bad?" 10 words. Something came up at work. Really sorry. Rain check. That was the entire message, her loss. She said it the way his mother said, true things flat, finished, not looking for a reaction. "Coffee's on me." "You look like a man who could use one more round." She was gone before he could argue. Daniel leaned back in the booth and looked at the 2 sugar packets he'd been folding without noticing, creased into perfect eighths. He unfolded one, tried to smooth it flat, gave up. Some things couldn't be unfolded back to what they were before. He pulled his phone out and called Stephen. "Talk to me." Stephen Webb answered every call the same way, loud, warm, already engaged before he knew what he was engaging with. She bailed. A pause. No, 7:38. 10 words. Rain check with a question mark. That's completely okay. That is completely on me. I talked to her yesterday. I swear she was into it. She asked what you looked like, she said. It's fine. It is not fine. You ironed that shirt, didn't you? Daniel was quiet for exactly 1 second too long. You ironed a flannel shirt. Something shifted in Stephen's voice, equal parts fond and hollowed out. Daniel, you don't iron flannel. That's the whole thing about you, man. You show up every single time. Pressed shirt, early, full tank of hope. And the world keeps not showing up back. I'm tired of watching it. There wasn't an answer for that. Because it was true. And true things from people who'd known you since you were 19 had a way of landing differently than true things from strangers or enstrul did in the part of you that none of you that couldn't argue back. I'm going home, Daniel said. Relieved the sitter. Read Lily a chapter. One more setup. One more, I've got someone who no more setup, Stephen. He said it gently. He meant it like a door closing. The soft kind. Now, the kind that was when I'm being dramatic. I appreciate you. I do. But I think I'm done with this part. A pause while he figured out how to say the next thing without it sounding like surrender. Some guys just aren't built for it. And I've got Lily. I've got the job. That's a full life. That's not a full life. Stephen's voice lost its warmth for just a moment. That's a duty roster. The words dropped into the space between them and sat there. Daniel stared at the flattened sugar packet on the table. Night, Stephen. Daniel. He ended the call before his friend could say the thing they both knew was coming. Because Stephen had known him since basic training, since before the marriage and the one deployment and the divorce. Stephen was one of maybe 3 people on Earth permitted to say the word lonely out loud in relation to Daniel Harris. And Daniel didn't want to hear it on a Tuesday night in a vinyl booth while wearing an ironed flannel shirt. He looked up for Patty and the check. That was when the door opened. He noticed the shift before he saw her. Not the door, not the sound of it, the room. A particular way a room changes when something enters it that the room was not prepared for. A table near the front stopped mid-conversation just for a beat. A busboy near the register slowed his tray clearing by half a step. The pie case made its full rotation in silence for once, as if it too had paused to look. Daniel looked up. She walked in from the November cold in a coat, the color of charcoal that had cost more than his truck payment, though he had no way of knowing that yet. Dark hair pulled back tight. Posture that belonged to someone who had never, not once in her adult life, been required to wait for anything. She stood just inside the door with her phone in her hand, and she was reading the screen with an expression that Daniel recognized before he'd processed what he was seeing. She'd been stood up too. He watched her read whatever was on that screen, watched her jaw go tight, watched her slide the phone into her coat pocket with a controlled slowness that was its own kind of fury, the expensive kind, the kind that cost more to maintain than just letting yourself out shout. She scanned the room once methodically. Every table was full, except the 2 top by the window, where a man in an ironed flannel shirt was sitting with a cold cup of coffee and 2 sugar packets folded into eighths. Their eyes met. Daniel looked away first, reflex. He wasn't a man who stared. He figured she'd find the hostess, ask about the wait, decide it wasn't worth it, leave. People like her, whoever she was, had places with reservation systems and lighting designed to flatter. Harlow's had neither. Footsteps on the old wood floor. They stopped at his table. He looked up. Up close, she was older than the coat suggested, mid-40s, the kind of woman whose age sat on her face, not as something that had happened to her, but as something she'd accumulated deliberately, proof of everything she'd built and decided and survived. There was grey at her temples she hadn't bothered to cover. Daniel found he respected that before he knew a single other thing about her. Is this seat taken? He glanced at the empty chair across from him, the chair that had been empty all night. The chair that had been waiting for someone who sent 10 words and a question mark. No. It's not taken, may I? It's a free country. He regretted it immediately. 34 years old, and he had just said it's a free country to a woman who was clearly accustomed to better sentences. He braced for it, but the corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile, the distant relative of a smile, 2 degrees removed. She pulled out the chair and sat, coat and all, no ceremony, and placed a small leather clutch on the table with the precision of someone setting down a chess piece. Not casual. Every movement deliberate. For a moment neither of them spoke. Patty materialized as if she'd been watching from the kitchen doorway, order pad already out. One look at the newcomer and her posture shifted not dramatically, just that almost imperceptible adjustment of a woman who spent 40 hours a week reading tables. Something to drink, ma'am? Coffee black. A glance at Daniel's mug. And whatever he's. No. Daniel said it before the sentence finished. She turned those grey-blue eyes on him. The kind of grey that had blue in the undertone. The kind that looked different depending on the light and was currently reading him like a page she wasn't sure she remembered correctly. I invited myself to your table, she said. Seems only fair, I've got it. She didn't argue. Looked at him one more beat, then turned back to Patty. Just the coffee. Thank you. Patty disappeared with the small smile of someone whose evening had just improved. Silence moved back in. The woman looked at his hands. You're going to tear that. Daniel looked down. The sugar packet he'd thought he'd set aside was back in his fingers, folded into eighths again. He set it flat on the table and put his hands in his lap. Nervous habit. What are you nervous about? He looked across at her, at the coat, at the clutch, at the undeniable sense of a person who could, if she chose, purchase this entire diner including the squeaking pie case and everyone in it. A woman I've never met just sat down across from me who I'm fairly confident could buy this building and the 3 next to it. That's a particular kind of pressure for a Tuesday. She studied him, said nothing long enough that he started to wonder if he'd read it completely wrong. He was usually decent at reading people. The Navy had trained that into him. 3 seconds to know whether the man across from you was steady or about to complicate your evening. But this one gave him nothing. Every door locked, every window covered. You were stood up, she said finally. Not a question. What gave it away? You're dressed for something you all stopped doing a finish 40 minutes ago. She nodded at his collar. Ironed flannel. Nobody irons flannel unless it matters. You shaved, there's a spot just under your left jaw where you rushed, which means it mattered. And you've been sitting alone at a table for 2 for, a glance at his mug, long enough for that to go thoroughly cold. Daniel blinked. You do this professionally? In a manner of speaking, she let the door stay shut. And then, with a flatness that was its own kind of honesty, I'd know the look anywhere tonight. Because I'm wearing it too, the almost smile was gone. What was I've left was something plainer and harder and truer pure. The man who didn't show, she said. He told me he'd lost track of time, flat, no drama. But Daniel heard everything underneath it, the layers of it, the particular insult of a woman's time being treated as something a person could simply misplace. As if an entire evening I hadn't had to spare was something that could fall out of a pocket. That's a garbage thing to do, Daniel said. For what it's worth, and yours? Something came up. He showed her the screen. 10 words, she read it. Something shifted in her face, not warmth exactly, but a recognition, one person's math landing on another person's and adding up to the sum. She handed the phone back. Yours is worse, she said. Mine used 47 words. 47 means he was managing the message. 10 means she wasn't even trying. Yeah, well, Daniel turned the phone face down. I think I'm out of the trying business anyway. My buddy talked me into this. I don't do this normally. The dating thing, why not? And there it was. The question he'd been circling all night. The one Stephen kept asking in different configurations. The one his daughter asked in her quiet 8-year-old way every time he came home alone and she was still awake. He looked at this woman across a diner table, someone he'd never see again. Someone who owed him nothing and expected nothing, who would step back out into whatever enormous life had delivered her here, and something about the clean safety of a complete stranger loosened his tongue in a way that nothing else had in 3 years. I've got an 8-year-old daughter, Daniel said. She already watched one person walk out of her life when she was 5. And every time I even think about letting someone new in, all I can see is her standing at the front door, watching another one leave. I'd rather be lonely for the rest of my life than put her through that one more time. The woman went very still. Patty set down the coffee black, steam rising, and both of them left it untouched. That, the woman said, after a moment that stretched just long enough to have its own gravity, is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in at least a year. Sorry. I don't normally. Don't apologize. She wrapped both hands around the mug without drinking. Do you have any idea how rare it is to sit across from someone and have them say a true thing without calculating what it will get them first? She shook her head once. Precise. Everyone I talk to wants something. Every single person. They smile at me and I can watch the math happening behind their eyes. You, she looked at him, don't want anything from me. I don't even know who you are, Daniel pointed out. Exactly. He put his hand across the table. Old habit. His father's habit, passed down the same way the inability to iron flannel was not. Daniel Harris. She looked at his hand. One long, suspended second where it could have gone either way. Then she took it. Firm, dry, brief. A handshake that had done serious work in serious rooms. Nicole. Nicole what? Just Nicole. For tonight she held his gaze. Tonight I'd like to be a woman who got stood up at a diner. Not a small gesture at the coat, the clutch, the entire apparatus of whoever she actually was, not the rest of it. Is that all right? Daniel didn't understand yet what the rest of it meant, the scale of it. But he understood the wanting behind it. He understood better than almost anyone sitting in this particular diner that sometimes you wanted badly, quietly, to be just a person for 1 hour. Not a function, not a role, just a person eating in a vinyl booth. Nice to meet you, Nicole, he said. Rough night, and she smiled. All the way, for the first time. It changed her whole face 10 years younger in one direction and 1,000 years more tired in the other, both things simultaneously and completely true. You have no idea, she said. They talked. Daniel couldn't have told you afterward where the next 90 minutes went. Good conversations had a way of doing that. One thing unlocked another. A joke opened a door to something real. Something real cracked into something unplanned. And then the coffee was cold, and the refill was cold, and the pie case had made enough rotations to lose count, and the room had emptied out around them, while Patty maintained a heroic performance of having tasks to do near the back counter. She asked about Lily. He didn't usually talk about Lily to strangers. Lily was the most important thing he had, and you didn't hand important things to people you didn't know. But Nicole asked the way almost no one ever asked, not the polite version, not the, and you have kids question that was really just a conversational placeholder. But like she had set down everything else she was carrying and picked up this question and intended to hold it with both hands. She's 8, Daniel said, going on 45. Reads 3 grade levels up. She thinks I don't know she's got a flashlight under her pillow for after lights out. He laughed and it came out warm and real and surprised him slightly. She's got this system where she organizes her stuffed animals by height every single night before bed. Tallest to shortest. And if I put one back in the wrong spot she notices every time. She sounds like a person who likes order in a world that hasn't given her much of it. Daniel's smile faltered at the edges. Yeah. That's exactly it. He turned his coffee cup 1/4 rotation. Something to do with his hands when the sentence was harder than the ones before it. Her mom left when Lily was 5. No big fight, no dramatic scene. She just decided this wasn't the life she wanted anymore. Deployments, never enough money, a kid who needed everything. I understand it. In a way, I actually understand each reason. A lot of marriages don't survive that combination, he paused, but you don't get to unchoose it, a kid. That's the part. She calls twice a year, birthday and Christmas. Lily lights up for about 10 minutes, and then she's got a dead phone in her hand, and you're the one who's there, Nicole said. I'm the one who's there. He said it without bitterness, just as a fact that had been a fact for long enough to stop hurting in its original shape and start hurting in a different one. I learned to braid hair off YouTube videos at midnight because picture day was coming and I was not going to let my daughter show up, looking like nobody in her life was paying attention. First month I was genuinely terrible at it. She looked like she'd been standing outside during heavy weather. I watched 12 videos. Got incrementally better. She still has opinions about the technique, which she shares without being asked. Nicole was quiet for a moment. You learned to braid hair, she said, off a video. At midnight, badly at first. The method improved that, Nicole said, and her voice had taken on an edge something fierce running just under the surface, a current beneath still water, is the most impressive thing I have heard this entire year. And I hear a great many impressive things in the course of my work. It's just being a dad. It is not just anything. She leaned forward slightly. Do you know how many men I know who would hand their child to someone else and consider that parenting complete? You sat down at midnight and learned a skill because your daughter's dignity mattered to you more than your sleep. Don't diminish that. It's not just anything. Its intensity of it caught him off guard. Caught her off guard too. She pulled back slightly, like she'd shown a seam in the composure she wasn't accustomed to revealing. Your turn, Daniel said, steering off himself before she could reconstruct whatever she'd briefly lowered. What do you do? For work? Or is that part of the rest of it? She turned her mug 1/4 rotation. The same unconscious motion as his. Neither of them mentioned it. I run a company, she said. What kind? The kind that consumes your entire life if you let it. A pause. The kind where you look up one day and you're 43 years old and you have a corner office with a view across 3 states and no one who'll call you just to find out how your Tuesday went. Did you let it? Consume your life. She looked out the window at the dark street, the yellow circle of the nearest street lamp. For 20 years. And now? And now I'm sitting in a diner in Charlotte at 9:10, drinking mediocre coffee with a man whose last name I just learned. And it's the most honest conversation I've had with another person in longer than I can accurately calculate. You built the company yourself, from nothing. No family money, no connections. Just an idea and a willingness to outwork everyone in every room who told me I couldn't. She said it without vanity, the way you'd describe the weather. Just a fact. 20 years ago, I rented a room and I worked until I built something real. That's something to be proud of, is it? Not a question. She looked out the window again. I've spent 20 years being proud of it. Tonight I got stood up by a man I didn't even particularly like, and sitting here I found myself thinking I would trade a significant portion of it for what you have, what I have. Daniel repeated it. I make $41,000 a year. My truck has 187,000 miles on it. You have a person, Nicole said, who organizes her stuffed animals by height and notices when you get it wrong. You have a person who will remember that you learned to braid her hair. When you're old, someone will hold your hand. She met his eyes across the table. Do you have any idea how much money that's worth? Living. And I can tell you with complete professional confidence that there isn't enough of it. The diner had emptied out around them without either of them noticing. Just their booth and the light above it, and Patty moving with theatrical slowness around the far counter. I don't believe you, Daniel said. Which part? That you'd actually trade it. People say that money doesn't matter. I'd give it all up. The simple things are what count. They say it. Then they go home to whatever they have and nothing changes. It's easy to get sentimental about the simple life when you've never actually had to ration groceries the week before payday. He kept his voice level. He wasn't angry. He just wasn't going to pretend. No offense. I've heard successful people get misty about simplicity, and it always rings a little hollow to the guy who's actually doing it. He braced for it. He'd been more direct than he'd meant to be. Instead, she laughed. Short, genuine, the sound of something escaping before she could decide whether to release it. You're absolutely right, she said. That's an easy thing to say, and you have zero reason to believe me saying it. She leaned forward. So let me say something I can actually demonstrate. I have had dinner with senators. Men who own football franchises. People whose names you'd recognize from any newspaper. Not one of them in 20 years has told me the real reason they were afraid to fall in love again. She held his gaze. You told a complete stranger in the first 10 minutes. And that is exactly why I asked to sit down. I saw you across this room with a folded sugar packet and an ironed flannel shirt, dressed up for a woman who didn't come, and I thought, there, that's a real one. I haven't seen one of those in a very long time. Daniel didn't have a response constructed for that. So he said the Ossis thing, which had been becoming a pattern in the last hour and a half. I'm glad your date bailed. Her eyebrows went up. That came out wrong. I'm sorry he was a jerk. But if he hadn't been, you wouldn't have, we wouldn't be. He gestured at the table, the cold coffees, the empty room, Patty's ongoing performance of needing to reorganize a napkin dispenser she'd already organized. This is the best night I've had in a long time, Nicole. I got stood up to get here, so I'm glad. Selfishly, genuinely glad. Something moved across her face that he couldn't name and didn't try to. It might have been the first hairline fracture in something that had been sealed for a long time. I'm glad, too, she said. Patty came over at 10:12 with the apologetic expression of a woman who genuinely hated being the one to say it. I am so sorry, folks. We close at 10 and it's Daniel was already looking at his watch, already reaching for his wallet. We kept you over. I'm sorry, you didn't keep me. Patty's voice had the warmth of someone who meant it exactly, honestly. Was kind of nice to see. She looked between them with an expression that Daniel couldn't quite read in the moment, but thought he understood later, when he had more context for what the evening had been. You two were, it was just nice. He left 2 20s for 2 cups of coffee without waiting for change. It was an extravagance he'd feel somewhere around Thursday, and he didn't regret a cent of it. He helped Nicole with her chair reflex, his mother's training, and she let him, and they walked out into the November cold together. The Harlow's sign clicked off behind them as the door swung shut. The parking lot was nearly empty. His Silverado sat under the one working light, honest and dented. The passenger door still showing the faint outline of where a bicycle had tagged it in a parking garage 2 years ago, and he'd never gotten around to fixing it. Further down, near the street, a black sedan idled at the curb, engine running. For figure visible in the front seat, Daniel looked at it, looked at her. A small understanding began to form. Not about the number, he didn't know the scale of it yet, just about the size of the rest of it, the rest she hadn't told him about, the rest that had a driver attached. That yours? Nicole followed his gaze. Something guarded came back into the set of her shoulders. Not defensive, just the armor going back on, the way you put on a coat when you step into cold air. Yes, driver and everything, Daniel. You said just Nicole for tonight. He kept his voice easy. It's still tonight. You're just Nicole with a very nice ride. The relief on her face was immediate and unguarded enough that it embarrassed him slightly, the way it embarrassed you to witness something private. She wasn't used to being let off the hook. He could see that plainly now. She was used to the calculation starting the second people saw the car. They stood in the cold for a moment that neither of them moved to end. I don't do this, Nicole said. I want to be clear about that. I don't sit down at strangers' tables. Tonight was an exception. I want you to know that. Okay, so I don't quite know what the protocol is for what comes next. Daniel thought about it. Thought about Lily asleep at home with Jess, the 19-year-old from down the street who charged $12 an hour and ate all his good crackers. Thought about the Silverado with 187,000 miles and the front brake pads that needed doing before winter. Thought about the sedan and the driver and the arithmetic that would never, no matter how you ran it, come out balanced between a Navy mechanic's salary and whatever number Nicole's life added up to. He thought about all of it. Then he heard Stephen's voice from earlier that afternoon. You show up every single time. That's the whole thing about you. There's a diner, Daniel said. This one. It's Tuesday. I've got Tuesdays free. My daughter stays at her grandmother's Tuesday nights. 7 o'clock. Same booth if I can get it. He paused. I'm not asking you to come. I know how that sounds. I know what I am, and I've got a decent guess at what you are, and those two things don't usually end up at the same table. So I'm not asking. One more pause, and this one cost him something, the pretending it didn't matter. I'm just telling you where I'll be. In case just Nicole ever wants coffee with someone who doesn't want anything from her. She was very still. The wind moved between them. The sedan's engine was a low-hum patient, expensive, an entire other life running quietly at the curb. Next Tuesday, Nicole said, 7 o'clock, same booth if you can get it. I make no promises, not asking for any. Something shifted in her face, the thing he'd been watching for and couldn't quite catch all evening. The distance shortening, not gone, but shorter. Then she did something that clearly surprised her as much as it surprised him. She stepped forward and briefly, lightly, placed her hand on his forearm, just for a second. Just the pressure of fingers through flannel. Then she pulled her hand back like a person who hadn't meant to touch a stove. Good night, Daniel Harris. Good night, Nicole. She walked toward the sedan. The driver had the door open before she reached it, and just before she stepped in, she stopped, turned back. Across 20 feet of cold parking lot. For what it's worth, your daughter is very lucky. Then she was in the car. The door closed. The taillights pulled onto the street and were gone, and Daniel stood alone under the one working light beside his dented truck in his ironed flannel shirt that still faintly smelled of steam. He should have felt foolish. Part of him did the part that had done all the arithmetic and knew what the answer was supposed to be. But the bigger part of him, driving home through the empty streets with the heater running and the radio off, kept returning to one thing. Not the coat, not the car, not the driver or the office or the view across 3 states. She'd said, you don't want anything from me, like it was the rarest thing in the world. Like a person who'd been thirsty for a long time, describing water. Jess reported that Lily had gone down easy. 1 glass of water requested, 1 trip to the bathroom negotiated, then out. Daniel paid her, thanked her, locked the door behind her, and stood for a moment in the quiet of his own house, the particular quiet of a house with a sleeping child in it, which was a different kind of quiet from an empty house, fuller, warmer. Even in the silence, he went to Lily's doorway. He did this every night. Just stood there for a few minutes watching her sleep. He didn't have a clean explanation for why. It wasn't worry. It was more like verification, checking that the most important thing in his life was exactly where it was supposed to be. She was on her side with her blanket up to one ear. On the shelf above the bed, the stuffed animals were in perfect order. Tallest to shortest, left to right, everyone accounted for. The seated bear had been placed at the far end on a small square of paper, which was new. Lily had apparently reached a regulatory decision about the ambiguous status of animals whose height could not be accurately measured in their current configuration, and created a separate administrative zone for contested cases. This was exactly the kind of thing she would do without mentioning it, and the next time Daniel touched the bears section, she would explain the entire framework to him with the patient exasperation of someone who could not believe she had to go over this again. He crossed the room and pulled her blanket up over her shoulder. She stirred, murmured something that wasn't quite a word, and settled back into wherever she'd been. Night, baby. He went to his own room and hung the flannel shirt carefully in the closet, smoothed the collar flat against the hanger out of habit, and as he did it, he caught himself doing something he hadn't done in longer than he could clearly remember. He was thinking about next Tuesday, not strategically, not with the arithmetic running. Just thinking about it the way you thought about something that was already on the calendar, and you didn't know yet whether it was going to matter, but some part of you, the part that got out of bed when the alarm went off it and kept moving regardless, had already decided it might. For the first time in 3 years, Daniel Harris turned off the light and fell asleep in under 20 minutes. He almost didn't go. Tuesday arrived the way Tuesdays arrived, grey, indifferent, requiring nothing and promising nothing. By 6 o'clock, Daniel had talked himself out of the booth by the window twice. He stood in his kitchen in his work clothes, phone in hand, running through the reasons a grown man who'd already done this once and should know better would choose to sit in a diner, waiting to see if a woman with a driver and a corner office with a view across 3 states would choose to spend her Tuesday evening in a vinyl booth. She was not going to show. That was the obvious conclusion. People like Nicole and he still didn't know what like Nicole actually meant, only that the sedan meant something significant. People like that had places to be on Tuesday evenings that were not Harlow's. She'd been gracious. She'd said next Tuesday because it was a kind thing to say to a man who'd just been stood up. She had not meant it the way he was choosing to interpret it. He called Stephen anyway. "You're doing the thing," Stephen said, before Daniel had finished his first sentence. "What thing?" "The thing where you think yourself out of your own life. You met a woman who sat down at your table and talked to you for 2 hours, and made you feel like an actual human being for the first time since the divorce, and now you're standing in your kitchen at 6:04 on a Tuesday, finding reasons not to go find out if she comes. She's not going to show, Stephen. Then go find out. If she's not there, you're out $4 on a Tuesday night. If she is, Stephen, let it hang. You going to let a car make that call for you? You did 2 tours." Daniel looked at the clock. 6:07. "Enough time. I hate that you know me this well," he said. "That it's my only real gift." He got there at 6:52. The booth by the window was open. He'd half hoped it wouldn't be a real obstacle, would have been useful, something to remove the choice from his hands. He sat down anyway, ordered coffee he didn't want, watched the door. 7 o'clock came. The door stayed shut. 7:06, a family of 4. Not her. 7:14, he told himself he'd give it until 7:30. That was reasonable. That was a man who'd shown up and waited a reasonable amount of time, not a man spiraling in a vinyl booth. 7:21, he was on his second sugar packet without noticing. At 7:24, the door opened, Nicolay walked in, and something happened in Daniel's chest that was entirely disproportionate to the situation and completely beyond his ability to manage. She was different from last week. Same quality of coat, different color navy this time, which he registered briefly as a coincidence that probably wasn't. But she was moving differently. Something coiled in the setette of her jaw. She spotted him across the room immediately and came straight to the booth without the hesitation of their first night. Sat down before he could stand, and before he could say anything. "I want to apologize. I'm late, you're here." And because it was simply, plainly true. That's the part that counts. I had every reason to have my assistant send a cancellation. She set her clutch on the table. Same placement as last week, same precision. And then I realized I had no way to reach you. No number, no way at all. And the image of you sitting here thinking I'd stood you up, she stopped, pressed her lips together. It was intolerable to me, the specific image of it. So I'm sorry I'm late. Daniel sat with that for a moment. You broke traffic laws, he said, so I wouldn't feel stood up. 3, to be precise, by a stranger you met once. Apparently, she looked genuinely annoyed at herself. I've been trying to understand it all week and haven't made much progress. Patty came around with a coffee pot, and when she saw both of them at the same table, her face did something unguarded and pleased. The face of someone whose faith in something had just been confirmed. You came back, she said. She meant both of them, and that was obvious. Coffee, black? You remembered you two were kind of the highlight of my week, if I'm being honest. Patty topped off Daniel's mug. Was nice to see. She disappeared before anyone could respond. Nicole looked after her. She was rooting for us. She was rooting for something, Daniel agreed. And Nicole almost smiled. The real one, the full one that changed her face. It didn't quite arrive yet, but it was closer than it had been last Tuesday. Closer, faster, which meant something he didn't examine too carefully. Tell me about your week, she said. And she said it the way she asked everything, like she had put down every other thing she was carrying and was holding this question with both hands, intending to hear the answer. So he told about Lily. Lily had gotten in trouble on a Wednesday, not the phone call kind. The small chair confined child-sized chairs they made parents sit in when the conversation required everyone at the same level, which Daniel had always privately thought was a technique designed to make adults feel implicated before anyone had said a word. He sat in the chair. He kept his face neutral. A teacher named Mrs. Paulson explained the situation. A boy named Carter, large for his age, a pattern of behavior around a girl named Soo Jin, who had transferred from out of state 2 months ago and whose English was still finding its footing. That morning at recess, Carter had knocked Soo Jin's lunch container off the bench for the second time in a week, and Lily Harris had walked across the yard, put herself between Carter and Soo Jin, looked up at a boy who had 4 inches and 30 pounds on her, and informed him that if he wanted to do it again, he was going to have to go through her first. Mrs. Paulson had used the phrase confrontational behavior. Daniel had kept his face exactly where it was. He understood. He understood that a school had to apply rules evenly, that confrontational behavior as a category existed for legitimate reasons, that Mrs. Paulson was not the enemy. He understood all of it. He also understood that his 8-year-old daughter had looked at the arithmetic of that situation, what she could lose, what the smaller kid couldn't afford to lose, and had made exactly the right call. Without hesitation, without calculating whether it was convenient, he thanked Mrs. Paulson. He walked out to the parking lot with Lily beside him. When they got to the Silverado and the doors were closed, he turned to his daughter and told her he was proud of her. Lily looked at him with the expression she wore when she was deciding whether an adult was being serious or performing seriousness. She seemed to conclude he meant it because she nodded once and said she thought she'd made the correct decision. Next time, Daniel told her, maybe find a teacher first. So you don't get suspended before 3rd grade. There might not be time for a teacher, Lily said, the gravity of a child who had already thought this through. Speed matters in those situations. He could not argue with that. Across the diner table, Nicole listened to all of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment that wasn't uncomfortable. Just full. She sounds, Nicole said, like the finest person I've never met. She is. And his face did something unguarded that he couldn't have controlled if he'd tried. I was something like that. It came out before she'd decided to say it. He could tell by the slight pause that followed, the recalibration, when I was small. There was a girl in my class whose family couldn't cover the school lunch program. So I started leaving extra where she'd find it under a book, beside her tray, somewhere she could take it without having to ask. And a teacher decided I was stealing food from the cafeteria and made an example of me in front of the entire class. What happened? I took the punishment. I never explained it. Daniel looked at her. Why? Because if I explained it, they'd have watched her more closely. She'd have lost the food. A pause. Even at 8 years old, I could do that math. What I could afford to lose. What she couldn't. She looked up. It's the same calculation your daughter made, isn't it? Standing between the bully and the smaller kid. Yeah, Daniel said. And something settled in him. The two things you didn't know were connected finally. Plainly connecting. Yeah, that's exactly it. They looked at each other across the table for a moment that lasted 3 seconds longer than necessary. Patty. 3 set down a refill and made herself invisible with the practiced skill of a woman who understood timing. That was the night the thing between them stopped being an accident and became a decision. Neither of them said so. But when Nicole stood to leave, she took a potent clutch and wrote a number on a paper napkin, her handwriting compact and exact, the kind that had signed a great many important documents, and slid it across the table. That's not the office, she said. Not my assistant. That's my actual phone. So that next time a call runs over, I can tell you I'll be late instead of leaving you here making origami out of sugar packets. She paused. Don't give it to anyone. Don't say where you got it. Daniel folded the napkin into his shirt pocket with a care that was not lost on either of them. I don't have anyone to give it to. Next Tuesday. Next Tuesday. And so it became a rhythm. Every Tuesday. 7 o'clock, the booth by the window. Patty started saving it without being asked, a small reserved card that disappeared before Daniel arrived, and the booth was there, and nobody discussed the arrangement because the arrangement understood itself. On the third Tuesday, halfway through the evening, Nicole looked at him with the specific expression of someone who had been carrying a question for a week and had finally decided to put it down on the table. You found out, she said. Not a question. He had. Stephen had done the thing Daniel told him not to do, searched, found a 2-year-old business magazine profile, sent a link without warning. The photograph, a woman stepping out of a glass building in a coat Daniel recognized. The headline naming her as one of the most influential executives in the country, and beside it the number, the one he hadn't looked up. Larger than Stephen had implied by a significant distance. I found out, Daniel said, and nothing. He looked at her steadily. You're still Nicole. You just happen to have a very successful Tuesday night hobby, something in her not dramatic, not visible to anyone who didn't know where to look, released, the way a rope released tension. Just easier. Most people, she said, start recalculating the moment they know. I know, Daniel said. That's exactly why I'm not going to. And the third Tuesday became the fourth, and the fourth became the fifth, and by the sixth they had built something neither of them had a name for yet. But both of them recognized the specific warmth a Tuesday evening that you start thinking about on a Wednesday morning, the weight of a phone folded in a shirt pocket, the strange and particular comfort of listen to you the way Nicole listened, like you were the only thing in the room worth paying attention to week by week, in pieces, he learned her. She had married once, briefly, at 26, to a man who had loved the idea of her, and discovered the idea and the reality were different structures. She had chosen the company when it came to that. She carried almost no regret about it, except one thing she still wouldn't name. She was beneath the control and the precision and the coat that cost more than his monthly payments. Genuinely funny. Dry and fast and mean about exactly the right people, the kind of funny that landed harder for being unexpected. She learned things about him too. That his mother, Dorothy, lived 20 minutes away and watched Lily on Tuesdays and had opinions about every decision Daniel had made in the last decade. Delivered obliquely while doing something else, so he couldn't argue directly. That he'd wanted to be a mechanic before the Navy had taken him a different direction, and now he fixed his own truck on weekends in the garage, and sometimes the Nostrup's trucks too, because the neighbor was 70 to 81 and Daniel had been raised a certain way. That he sang to Lily when she couldn't sleep badly, deliberately, because the badness made her laugh and the laughing made her sleepy, which was the entire operational point. On the fifth Tuesday, Nicole looked at him across the table and said, "Sing me one." "Absolutely not. Might you sing to your daughter? She's captive. She lives with me. You have a sedan and a driver and a dozen exits." "I have never been sung to," Nicole said. And the way she said it, flat, factually, no performance attached, was the whole thing. Not a complaint. A true statement about the interior of her life. Not once. Not by anyone. Not every 3 years. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, and then, quietly, absurdly, in Harlow's diner at 9:45 on a Tuesday with Patty, pretending to have inventory needs 30 feet away. He sang 8 bars of a song his grandfather used to hum while fixing fence posts on the property in eastern Tennessee, where Daniel had spent 2 weeks every summer until he was 15. He sang it deliberately off-key because his grandfather had always said the best songs were the ones where you could hear the person, and not just the notes. Nicole put her hand over her mouth, laughed. The real one, the escaped one, the one that arrived before she could decide whether to release it. And then the laughing went sideways into something else, something that wasn't laughing at all, and she turned to look out the window fast so he wouldn't see her face. "That was genuinely terrible," she said, when she'd gotten herself back. "Told you. It was the kindest thing anyone has done for me in more years than I want to count." Still looking at the dark street. Her voice had gone quiet. "You have absolutely no idea. So tell me," Daniel said. "The one thing. You said there was one thing you regret. Tell me what it is." She was quiet long enough that he thought she wasn't going to go into an answer then. "I never had a child." The table held the sentence between them. "I told myself for 20 years it was a choice. That I'd chosen the company. And that was true, right up until the moment my body made the choice for me, and I understood that I'd been telling myself I was choosing, when really I'd just been postponing. Assuming there was more time, a pause. There's always more time. Until there's a board meeting on a Tuesday you thought was free. She looked back at him. That's the one thing. I built something that will outlast me, and I have no one to leave it to who will care that it was mine. Daniel didn't say he was sorry. He'd learned she received that with a neutral expression and quietly discarded it. He said the true thing instead. You would have been extraordinary at it. You can't know that. I can, actually. He leaned forward. Because you took the punishment for the hungry girl. Because you did the math at 8 years old about what you could afford to lose. That's the whole job, Nicole. The entire job of it. Figuring out what you can absorb so your kid doesn't have to. You've had that in you the whole time. You just aimed it at a company instead of a person. She looked at him for a long moment, something in her face not breaking exactly. More like the way ice changes before it lets go. You can't see it happening, but you know it is. I would like to meet her, Nicole said. Your daughter, if you thought it was wise. I understand completely if you don't. She's the most important thing in your life, and I'm a woman you see on Tuesdays, but I would like to. Someday. If, and there it was. The question inside all the other questions. The one Daniel had known was approaching for 2 weeks, and had been turning over without letting himself turn over. He had a rule. Made 3 years ago, kept with the same consistency. He kept everything: maintenance schedules, financial reserves, the nightly check of the stuffed animal lineup. No one met Lily. Not the woman from the base gym who'd left her number on his windshield. Not the divorced mother from Lily's school who'd made her interest clear over 3 consecutive pickup conversations. No one. Because Lily had watched one person leave, and Daniel had sworn not out loud, just in the part of himself where the real promises lived, that she would never again build something with someone who might not stay. He had known Nicole for 6 Tuesdays. By every rule he'd made, the answer was no. Give me a little time, he said. It's not about you, it's about her. She only gets so many people. I have to be careful with who you don't have to explain quickly. Like she'd anticipated this and had the response already organized. She comes first, that is exactly as it should be. And that you'd even consider it is. She stopped. Tried again. Take all the time you need. And the fact that she said it, like that, no pressure, no making it about herself. Putting Lily first without being asked to was the moment. Daniel would think later, when he stopped being able to pretend to himself that this was just coffee. He introduced them a month later. He did it the careful way. The way you introduce something precious to something unknown, slowly, in daylight, with an easy exit available if anything felt wrong. Freedom Park, on a Saturday morning in December, the paths clear of ice, the pond visible from the main entrance. He told Lily only that they were going to meet a friend of his. A woman he'd gotten to know. She was nice. Lily didn't have to like her. Lily could tell Daniel whatever she thought afterward, and he would listen without arguing. Lily said, "Does she know about the stuffed animal system?" Daniel said he'd mentioned it. Lily considered this. "Does she understand the regulatory zone for seated animals?" Daniel said that was probably a conversation for the actual meeting. Lily accepted this and got in the truck. He had rehearsed a dozen ways it could go wrong. Lily could shut down. She did this with unfamiliar situations, went quiet and watchful, gathering data before committing to a position. Nicole could be stiff in the way competent adults sometimes were with children, unable to find the right register, talking too formally or too brightly, the way you talk to a child when you were afraid of getting it wrong and the fear made you worse. What happened was neither of those things. What happened was that Nicole Torres sat down on the ground in Freedom Park in a pair of slacks that cost more than Daniel's monthly mortgage payment toy, opened her bag and placed 5 small carved wooden animals on the grass in front of Lily: a giraffe, a bear seated, an elephant, a rabbit, a mouse. "Your dad tells me you have a system," Nicole said. "Show me how these would rank." Lily looked at the animals, looked at Nicole. The data gathering happened visibly, the slight pause of a child running calculations before committing. Then she made her decision. "You put the giraffe first," Lily said. "That's wrong." Nicole received this without flinching. "Is it? The bear is sitting, but if he stood up he'd be taller than the giraffe's neck. Because the neck doesn't count. It's not structural height." Lily lined them up, adjusting with both hands, unhurried. "It's just neck." "Neck isn't height," Nicole said, with the gravity of someone receiving a compliance briefing. "Neck is just neck." Lily looked up. "Most people get this wrong. I've clearly been doing it wrong my entire life. I can help you," Lily said. And she said it the way she said everything that mattered, not as an offer but as a fact, something that had already been decided. It takes a while to understand the full system. but it's worth it. Daniel was standing 6 feet away. He had to look at a tree for approximately 30 seconds, because a father who had learned to braid hair off YouTube videos at midnight was not going to cry in a public park in Charlotte, North Carolina. He had a reputation to maintain, mostly with himself. They walked the path around the pond. Lily narrated the social dynamics of the duck population, with the focused authority of someone filing a report territorial disputes, the grey one near the far bank who had boundary issues, the two smaller ones who appeared to be operating as a unit for feeding purposes. Nicole asked follow-up questions, real ones, not the kind adults ask children to fill silence specific, building on what Lily had said before, remembering details from 2 sentences ago and connecting them to new information as it arrived. At one point, Nicole asked about the duck in the back with the different coloring. Lily said that one was Gerald. He had territorial issues and it needed to be watched. Nicole nodded and said that was very useful intelligence. Lily looked at her with the expression of someone who had found an unexpected peer. When Lily ran ahead to investigate a Labrador belonging to a man in a green jacket near the far bench, Nicole came to stand beside Daniel. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "She's extraordinary," Nicole said. Her voice was not entirely steady. "Yeah, I understand now. Everything you said. Why you keep her so carefully?" A pause. "I've known her for 40 minutes and I'd guard her with my life. How did you know to do that?" Daniel nodded toward the carved animals in Nicole's bag. "The height thing. How did you know that was the way in?" "I didn't know it would work," Nicole said. "I only knew that if a child organizes her world by height, and height is her language, and if you want to talk to someone, you learn their language." First, she watched Lily crouch down and let the Labrador investigate her outstretched hand, perfectly calm, narrating something to its owner. "It's the same principle in every negotiation I've ever sat in. Find what someone loves and learn to speak it." A pause. "I've just never used it for anything that actually mattered until now." "This matters," Daniel said. Nicole turned and looked at him, and the distance was gone, all of it. Everything she'd been keeping between herself and the world, the locked doors and the covered windows and the composure that cost money to maintain, just on, no space left, no calculation. "I have been alone for 20 years, she said, and told myself it was the price of building something real. And I have spent 6 Tuesdays with a Navy mechanic from Charlotte and 1 Saturday morning watching his daughter explain duck territorial behavior. And I have never, not once, in any boardroom, in any deal, in anything I have built or decided or accomplished, wanted anything the way I want to be allowed to keep doing this." Her voice dropped. "That terrifies me. Because wanting things you can't keep is how people like me end up destroyed." "This matters," Daniel said again, quietly, firmly, because it was true and because she needed to hear it said plainly without conditions. He took her hand. She let him. They stood there holding hands, watching Lily explain something to the Labrador's owner, with the patient thoroughness of someone who believed information should be properly transferred, and for a moment the enormous gap between a $41,000 salary and whatever number Nicole's life added up to simply didn't exist. There was no currency for a moment like that. No exchange rate. On the drive home, Lily was quiet for almost 3 minutes, which in Lily's economy was a significant processing interval. "Can she come to my birthday?" she said finally, looking out the window at the passing streets. "You liked her?" "She listens." A pause. "Most grown-ups pretend to listen. They're waiting for you to finish so they can say their thing. She actually does it." Another pause. "Also, her theory of height is completely wrong, and I have a lot of work to do with her." Daniel's throat was thick. "Yeah, baby. She can come to your birthday." The party was in 3 weeks. Nicole arrived at 1:15, which was 45 minutes before the guests were scheduled, and 15 minutes before Daniel had expected anyone. Not in the black sedan with the driver. In an SUV she'd driven herself, which Daniel hadn't known she owned or knew how to operate, though in retrospect he should have assumed she knew how to operate anything she turned her attention to. The back of the vehicle was full. Streamers still in packaging, a cake from an actual bakery in a white box, and 11 small wrapped gifts in identical paper, one for every child on the guest list. "You didn't have to do that," Daniel said, taking a box from her arms. I looked it up. She was already scanning his mother's backyard with the focused attention of someone assessing terrain and resources. At this age, children experience another child's party as a test of their own importance. Every child in that yard today should go home feeling like they matter. This solves it. A pause. Where do you want the bounce house? Dorothy Harris came out the back door, drying her hands on a dish towel, and stopped. Dorothy Harris did not stop for things. She was the kind of woman who moved through situations the way water moved through a landscape, around obstacles, over smaller things, always forward. She had raised Daniel after his father died when Daniel was 11, and before that she had kept the household running through years of a marriage that had not always been straightforward, and she had done all of this without breaking stride once that Daniel could remember. She stopped the woman in dark jeans, not the coat, not the clutch, actual jeans and a canvas jacket with her hair back in a practical ponytail, directing the inflatable castle placement with one hand and holding a bakery box with the other, apparently qualified as full-stop material. So you're Nicole. Nicole set the bakery box down on the patio table, crossed the yard, and extended her hand. And Daniel saw it, the thing he hadn't seen from her before, the almost imperceptible crack in the composure. She was nervous. This woman who had walked into rooms full of people who had decided to be difficult and walked out having gotten what she came for. Nervous, standing in Dorothy Harris's backyard. Mrs. Harris. Thank you for having me. Daniel talks about you constantly, always, with a specific kind of productive fear that I've learned to translate as deep respect. Dorothy's mouth moved. Not a smile yet. The precursor to a smile, the thing that came before the decision. He's scared of me. A beat. Good instinct. She looked Nicole over once thoroughly, the way she looked at everything that mattered. You came early to help set up. I did. Most of the women he's known over the years came late and left early. Not many of them to begin with. Nicole didn't look away. He's careful because of her. She nodded toward the back door where Lily had appeared briefly, heard voices, and retreated to finish putting on shoes. And he should be. She's the finest child I've ever met. I would rather dismantle everything I've spent 20 years building than be one more person who hurts her. A pause. A pauses. So if you're taking my measure, Mrs. Harris, and you should be, you'd be a poor grandmother if you weren't. That's the measurement. I know exactly what's at stake here. I don't take it lightly. Dorothy looked at her. A long moment. Cake's in the kitchen, she said, finally. Needs candles. You know how to put 8 candles on a cake so a child doesn't set her own hair on fire. I'll figure it out. Dorothy turned and went inside. Nicole looked at Daniel with an expression that was equal parts relief and residual adrenaline, nailed it, and terrified simultaneously. Then she followed his mother. Daniel stood in the backyard holding a wrapped gift box and thought about the fact that he had never, not once in 34 years, seen anyone get through Dorothy Harris's evaluation process that efficiently. Though to be accurate, Dorothy hadn't been won over. She had decided to allow the evaluation to continue. From Dorothy Harris, this was equivalent to a standing ovation. The party was exactly the thing Daniel had warned Nicole it would be. Chaos. Specific, 11 children in a defined space chaos. The bounce house became disputed territory within the first 4 minutes. Juice boxes were punctured, one intentionally, one accidentally, one in circumstances that remained unclear even after investigation. A boy named Marcus ate an amount of cake that required him to sit in the shade afterward and reconsider his choices, and Lily sat beside him and explained, with patient precision, that this outcome had been statistically predictable given his serving-size decisions, which Marcus received with the dignity of someone who already knew and intended to make the same choices again next year. And in the middle of all of it, Nicole Torres sat cross-legged on Dorothy Harris's December lawn in her canvas jacket, mediating a dispute about slide rotation order with the same focused gravity she apparently brought to quarterly earnings reviews. The children accepted her completely, because children could not be deceived about presence they could detect from 30 feet, whether an adult was actually there or an only appearing to be. Nicole was actually there, completely, in a way that had nothing to do with the number attached to her name. Steufen showed up with a case of soda, took one look at the woman on the grass negotiating a ceasefire between 2 7-year-olds over bounce house jurisdiction, and walked directly to Daniel. That's her, Stephen said. That's her. Stephen lowered his voice to a register that was not actually lower than his normal voice, but which he clearly believed was. Daniel. I did some research. I told you not to. I know what I told you I wouldn't do. I'm telling you what I did anyway, a pause. Do you know what she's worth? No, Daniel said. And I'm not going to. Stephen stared at him like he'd spoken in a language that didn't pass. You're not going to? How are you not even? Because that's exactly why she's here. Daniel said it, without looking at Stephen. Watching Nicole accept a juice box from Lily with both hands because Lily had informed her this was the correct juice box receiving posture. The number isn't why she sat down at my table. The number isn't why I showed up the second Tuesday. If I start looking up the number is in the room with us, doing math I don't want done. I'm not putting the number in the room. Stephen was quiet for a full 5 seconds. For Stephen, this was essentially geological silence. I want to be best man, Stephen said. Goodbye, Stephen. I set up blind date. I am the manifestational cause of all of this. I want formal acknowledgement and a prominent, go get a plate. Stephen went and got a plate. After the last minivan had pulled out of the driveway, after the bounce house had been deflated and folded into the garage, after Dorothy had made 3 trips to the kitchen with cake and given Nicole a look on the second trip that Daniel recognized as provisional acceptance, which from Dorothy was essentially a marriage blessing, he found Nicole in the kitchen doing the dishes. Not starting them, doing them. Halfway through the pile, sleeves pushed up, working with the focused expression of someone in the middle of a task they had decided to complete fully. You don't have to, your mother, Nicole said, not turning around, is watching me through the window above the sink right now to see whether I'll finish or find a reason to stop at the 2/3 point. So I'm going to finish every single one. Because I know how women like your mother take a person's measure, and it isn't by the quality of the cake. Daniel leaned against the counter. You've got her figured out. I've spent 20 years reading rooms. She rinsed a plate, set it in the rack. This is the best day I've had in longer than I can honestly calculate. I inflated a bounce house. I got frosting in my hair. I sat on the ground for 45 minutes mediating playground disputes. My phone has been off since 1 o'clock, she paused. Set another plate in the rack. The world did not end, Daniel. I keep expecting someone to call and tell me it ended. It hasn't, it's going to be okay, he said quietly. She turned then, and her face was open in the way he'd only seen it occasionally, all the usual distance set aside, the precision put down, nothing between them and the truth. I know, she said, and she sounded genuinely surprised that she meant it. 3 weeks in which nothing catastrophic happened. 3 weeks that felt, to Daniel Harris, like learning to breathe through a different mechanism than the one he'd been using for 3 years. The old mechanism that ran on discipline and stubbornness, and the refusal to need anything he couldn't provide himself. Nicole came to a Tuesday and then a Saturday, and then recklessly, on a plain Wednesday because she wanted to, and apparently that was now a reason she appeared on the sideline of Lily's soccer practice in her canvas jacket, with a travel mug of coffee, and proceed to cheer at a volume that startled the parents round her. And, once, a referee who was 40 yards away and clearly hadn't expected it from that direction. She learned the names of Lily's teachers. She learned the social geography of the 3rd grade lunch table and the names of the key players, and which alliances were stable and which were currently contested. She was there the evening the loose tooth finally let go. Nicole holding a paper towel, completely composed, providing calm logistical information about the Tooth Fairy's operational infrastructure. Regional distribution hubs, a points-based reward system, next-day processing for standard submissions, expedited handling available for teeth lost under unusual circumstances. By the end of it, Lily was less worried about the gap in her mouth and more interested in understanding the supply chain implications. You made it a supply chain, Daniel said afterward. Disorganized magic is what frightens children, Nicole said. Give something a system and they'll trust it completely. It's the same principle that makes insurance work. He looked at her standing in his kitchen explaining Tooth Fairy logistics in the warm yellow light up above the counter, and understood, with the specific clarity of someone who has been resisting a conclusion for long enough, that the resistance has become its own kind of exhaustion, that he was in love with this woman. All the way, past the point of useful management. Sakadataver attached to her name had never entered into it once, which was either the most important thing that had happened to him in years, or a catastrophe that hadn't shown its shape yet. It turned out to be both. The signs were small at first. A Tuesday, when Nicole arrived 38 minutes late with her phone lighting up continuously on the table, a name on the screen that he couldn't read from his angle. She apologized, explained there'd been a situation with a vendor contract that couldn't wait. Daniel said it was fine. No, a Tuesday when she took a call in the parking lot for 22 minutes while he waited inside, and came back with her face in the specific arrangement of someone who had managed a difficult thing and was not going to discuss the managing of it. A situation in Phoenix, she said. It's handled. He said okay. He just noticed. A Tuesday when she texted at 6:45 a single line, cannot make it tonight, truly sorry. I'll explain everything. He sat at the booth anyway because it felt strange not to. Patty refilled his coffee without comment and didn't pretend not to notice the empty seat. Individually, none of it was alarming. Together, it was the shape of something he already knew the name for, a world that was larger than the space you needed it to fit in, reaching out at intervals to remind you of its actual dimensions. He had watched it happen to his marriage from the inside. He recognized the early signs, the way you recognized the first pressure change before weather arrived. He didn't say anything, because Nicole was not his ex-wife and the situations were not the same, and he was not going to let pattern recognition do the work of actual judgment. But he noticed, on the Tuesday after the one she'd missed, she came in with a full account of the situation, a regulatory review that had cascaded into 3 other things. A timeline that had compressed, a choice she'd had to make between 2 things she didn't want to choose between. He listened. He believed her. All of it was true and none of it was the point. You're quiet tonight, Nicole said, somewhere in the middle of his second coffee. I'm okay, you're not. You've folded that napkin into eighths. She reached across the table and took it from him gently, set it flat. We tell each other true things. That's the whole of what we do here. So tell me, Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Lily asked about you this morning, he said. She asked when she gets to see you again. I said soon. She asked if soon meant this Tuesday or real soon, which are different categories in her system, and I didn't have an answer. He turned his cup. And then she asked me something else. And I've been carrying it around all day. What did she ask? She asked if you were going to stay. He met her eyes. Not in those words. She's 8. She asked if you have to go away a lot for your job. I said sometimes yes. She got very quiet. And then she said, his voice caught, and he held it. She said, Mom had to go away a lot for her job too. Nicole went completely still. Her mother didn't have a job that took her away, Daniel said quietly. Not really. That's just the story Lily built at 5 because the truth was too large to hold. Mom had to go for her job. It's how a child makes it not her fault. And now she's watching a woman she's starting to love get pulled away by phone calls and Phoenix and situations that need handling. He stopped. And in her head, I think she's starting to write the same story. Nicole has to go for her job. He looked up. I swore to that little girl not out loud. Just in the part of me where the real promises live, that I would never let her love someone who might. He couldn't finish it. Nicole's hands had gone white around her coffee cup. I would never leave her, she said, and her voice was low and fierce and shaking. Daniel, I would never. You wouldn't mean to, Daniel said, and it came out gentler than he felt. That's the thing. Her mother didn't wake up one day and decide to break a 5-year-old's heart. The life just got bigger than the love. That's how it happens. Nobody chooses it. The life gets bigger one Phoenix at a time until one day the phone rings during her birthday and you take the call because thousands of people's jobs depend on you taking it, and Lily watches you walk to the parking lot and something in her closes up and it never opens again. He shook his head. I've watched it happen to her once. I would do anything before I watched it happen twice. The diner was quiet around them. Patty had gone to the back. It was just the 2 of them and the thing that had been building under the surface for weeks, finally up in the light where they had to look at it directly. So, what are you saying? Nicole said. Her composure was a wall now, but Daniel could see exactly what it was costing her to hold it. Are you saying we stop? No, he put both hands flat on the table. I'm saying I'm scared. I'm saying I met a woman on a Tuesday and now she's in my daughter's birthday plans, and my kid is starting to write dangerous stories in her head. And I don't have a plan for this. I've always had a plan. I'm saying I don't know how to do this without one of us getting hurt. And the one I can't watch get hurt is 8 years old and organizes her animals by height so the world will hold still. He looked up at her. I'm not saying stop. God help me. I don't want to stop. I'm saying I need you to understand what you're walking into before you walk any further into it. Because if you come to that birthday, Nicole, if you come and she hands you the rest of what she's been holding back, I can't undo that for her. I've tried to undo it once. You can't. It becomes part of who they are. For a long time, Nicole said nothing. She looked at her hands, at the table, at the napkin she'd smoothed flat. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Quieter, stripped of every layer of management down to something he'd only heard from her once before, the voice of the 8-year-old who'd let them call her a thief. No one has ever, she said, asked me to choose them over the company. Not in 20 years, not my husband. He asked me to choose him, which was different, which was about his pride. No one has ever sat across from me and said, choose this child, choose showing up, choose being smaller so someone else can be safe. She looked up, and the terrible thing, Nathan, she stopped. Daniel, I'm sorry. The terrible thing is that no one has ever given me a reason to until now. Daniel's throat was too tight to speak. I don't know if I can do it, Nicole said. I want to tell you I can. I want to tell you I'll always show up. I'll never take the call. Phoenix can burn. But I built something enormous and thousands of people depend on it. And I don't know how to just set it down. I've never tried. I don't know if I'm capable of it. A tear escaped. She let it. But I'll tell you what I do know. I know that I would rather try and fail at this than succeed at everything else I've ever done. And I know that if you let me come to that birthday, I will move every obstacle between me and that room to be there. Present, phone off entirely, not as an apology. As a promise I intend to keep. She reached across and took his hand. Her fingers were cold and shaking. It's the only promise I've made in 20 years that I actually care whether I keep. Let me try to keep it, please. Daniel looked at their hands on the table. The choice wasn't whether to risk it. The risk was already in. Lily was already attached. He was already attached. The door was already open. The choice was whether to face what was coming together or alone. And he had spent 3 years doing everything alone. The party's at 2, he said. 3 weeks from Saturday at my mum's house. There will be juice boxes and us and 11 children running at full speed, and it is going to be the least glamorous afternoon of your entire life. Nicole let out a breath that was half laugh and half something else entirely. I'll be there at 1:30, she said, to help set up. You don't have to help. I'll be there at 1:30, Nicole said again, and it wasn't negotiable. He understood that. It was a woman planting a flag phone off in the car, not on, silent, completely off. And if Phoenix burns down, then it burns down. Because I will be inflating a bounce house for a little girl who thinks necks don't count as height. And there is nowhere on this earth I would rather be. 3 weeks in which the world did not end. 3 weeks in which Nicole Torres came to a soccer practice and stood on the sideline and cheered with a volume that startled a referee. 3 weeks in which she learned the names of Lily's teachers, tracked the status of the loose tooth with genuine investment, and explained the tooth fairy's supply chain in enough detail that Lily stopped being afraid of the gap and started being interested in the logistics. 3 weeks in which Daniel caught himself, more than once, standing in his own kitchen, watching Nicole chop vegetables badly while Lily had technique corrections, and thinking that he had never in his adult life felt this specific thing, not relief exactly, and not happiness exactly, but the sensation of something that had been working very hard for a very long time finally, tentatively, being allowed to rest. The moment came on a Thursday. He was under the Silverado with the drain pan when his phone started. Not one call, a cascade. Stephen 6 times. An unknown number 4 times, Nicole once. He slid out from under the truck with grease on both hands and opened Nicole's message first. Don't look at the news. Please call me right now. He looked at the news, second seasons. That was all it took to find it, because it was everywhere. 2 photographs placed side by side. The first was Nicole, not his Nicole, not the woman with frosting in her hair and a juice box held in both hands. This was the other one, crisp, composed, stepping out of a glass building in a coat Daniel recognized, under a headline from 2 years ago naming her as one of the most influential executives in the country. And beside the headline, the number. The one he'd never looked up. Large enough that when his eyes landed on it, his stomach dropped in a specific, involuntary way. The second photograph had been taken from a distance with a long lens. The soccer sideline, 3 Wednesdays ago. Nicole chief in her canvas jacket, Daniel beside her, and between them unmistakably, in a green jersey with the number 7 on the back, Lily. Face turned slightly away from the camera, mostly obscured. But there, in the frame, in the story, under a headline that called her the mystery child, Daniel called Nicole with grease-stained hands. She picked up before the first ring finished. Daniel, I am so sorry. Someone must have followed me. I should have been more careful. I was happy and I stopped being careful and now you're… Is her face fully visible? His voice was flat. The voice he used when something was burning and someone needed to not be burning, mostly obscured in the images that are circulating. My attorney, Margaret, is already filing on the outlets with the clearest shots. For minors, there are injunctions, not just takedowns. It takes hours, not days, for the legal mechanism to work. Hours, he said. Hours. I promise you we're containing it. Where her face is clearest, we're moving fastest. I have to go get her from school, Daniel said, already moving toward the truck. Keys, grease marks on the door handle. Before another parent sees this, before some kid says something on the playground, she is not finding out about her own life from a headline. He was in the seat, engine turning over. She finds out from me. Do you understand that? Yes. Go, of course. Daniel, tell me what to do. Tell me what helps. Right now what helps is you handling your side while I handle mine. You make her face disappear. I'll take care of the little girl attached to it. He hung up before she could respond and drove to the school. The whole way there he tried to figure out how to explain to an 8-year-old that her private life had become a national search term. He didn't figure it out in time. Lily had already done the work herself. She was in the back seat before they'd left the school sparkling lot, seatbelt on, looking at the back of his head with the expression she wore when she was processing something that required care, Daddy. Something came up. Is it about Nicole? And when his eyes went to the rearview mirror, Lily was watching him with that look, the one that was too old for her face, the one she'd had since she was 5 and had needed to make sense of things that didn't make sense. Marcus said his mum showed him a picture of you and Nicole on the internet. You and Nicole at my soccer. And that Nicole is really, really rich. Like actually a billionaire, a pause that had weight in it. Is that true? Daniel pulled over to the shoulder of the road, put the truck in park, turned around to face his daughter. Yeah, he said. It's true. Nicole has a lot of money. Lily absorbed this with the seriousness she brought to all significant information. Does she still not understand about necks? Lily asked. Daniel laughed. It came out broken and full at the same time, the way things came out when you were too many emotions at once to separate them cleanly. She's still working on it, he said. Then it doesn't change anything. Lily looked at him steadily. She's still Nicole. She just has more money than I thought. A pause. Daddy, if she has so much money, why does she come to my soccer? Rich people don't come to kids' soccer, and there it was, the real question. Dressed in logistics, but underneath it, why would someone like that choose someone like us? Because you matter to her, Daniel said, and he made his voice as steady and true as he'd ever made anything. The money has nothing to do with it. She comes to your soccer because watching you play makes her happier than anything that money can buy. That's the whole reason. That's the only reason. Lily looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded and looked out the window. Okay, she said. Can we get McDonald's since I got out early? The storm didn't stop at the photographs. Storms never did. By that evening, there were follow-up pieces. By the next morning, there were 2 men in a car parked at the end of Daniel's street, in a vehicle that didn't belong to the neighborhood, and long lenses visible through the windshield. He walked Lily to the bus with his body angled between her and the cameras. And he explained the situation to his commanding officer, and he sat down with Lily's teacher and principal to make sure the school understood what was happening, so they could run interference. Every conversation peeled back another layer of the quiet life. Privacy, routine, stability, the steady architecture of a household where an 8-year-old could feel safe, and now the exterior was exposed to anyone who wanted to look. Nicole's world went to war on its own front simultaneously. He learned the shape of it in pieces. Through phone calls she took in parking lots and came back from with her face carefully arranged. The board was mobilized. The story had raised questions about judgment, about focus, about whether a CEO with a newly public personal life was still fully committed to a company that required everything. Old rivals identified the opening. A faction of the board that had been waiting for exactly this kind of moment began. quietly and with precision, to apply pressure. They're using it, Nicole told him, her voice carrying a tiredness he hadn't heard from her before. You and Lily. They're framing it as evidence that I've lost my focus. As if caring about a human being is a strategic failure, a pause. 20 years I gave them. And the moment I want one true thing for myself, they treat it like a liability to be managed. You could deny it, Daniel said. He said it because he needed to say it because it was the exit door, and she deserved to know he'd hold it open if she wanted to walk through. You could say I'm nobody. A misunderstanding. Kill the story. Protect everything you've built it. Silence on the line. Is that what you want? Nicole asked. The question was careful and precise. For me to tell the world you're nobody? I want you to be okay. I want you to keep the thing you spent 20 years building. You didn't answer my question. No, he said quietly. It's not what I want, but I don't have the right to ask you to burn your whole life down for a mechanic and his kid. You're not asking, she said. That's the thing about you. You never ask. You hold the door open and you let me choose and you tell yourself it's generosity. Every single time, a pause. I'm not going to say you're nobody, Daniel. I would resign before I said that. Don't say that. Don't make that kind of decision in the middle of a war. What if the war is showing me what I needed to see, she said. What if I'm sitting in a corner office with a view I stopped noticing 3 years ago, and the only weeks I've felt genuinely alive since then involved a bounce house and a tooth fairy supply chain, and now these men want me to choose, and I'm looking at the choice. Really looking at it, he didn't have an answer for that, because it was terrifying. Not the threat to her position, that was her domain and she was better equipped for it than anyone he'd ever met. What terrified him was what came after, the weight of it. The fight got worse in the way he'd feared most. The board began scheduling emergency sessions designed specifically to test Nicole's commitment meetings, timed to force her to choose. Votes moved to create conflicts with her personal calendar. The machinery of a campaign to push her out assembled piece by piece, with the patience of people who had been doing this kind of thing for a long time, and Nicole, who could manage 16 simultaneously and had been doing so for 20 years, could not be in a boardroom 3 states away and on a soccer sideline in Charlotte at the same moment. Cons remained undefeated. The Wednesday practice came and the sideline spot was empty. The Tuesday booth was hers, but she wasn't in it. Phone calls got shorter and more fragmented, punctuated by other voices in the background, by the sounds of rooms that needed her attention immediately. And Lily noticed. Of course Lily noticed. Lily noticed everything. Is Nicole coming to my recital? 3 days before the date, Lily was at the kitchen table doing homework, not looking up, asking it the way she asked things she'd been thinking about for a while. She said she'd come. She made a specific promise. She's going to try, Daniel said. She has a lot going on with work right now. Lily got very quiet. The quiet was worse than the question. The night of the recital, Nicole's seat was empty. The board had moved the vote up to that same evening. Deliberately. They knew she had somewhere to be. They moved it anyway. Daniel sat in the folding chair beside the empty one and watched his daughter walk out onto the gymnasium stage with the other third graders. Lily scanned the audience. Left to right, methodical. Then again, looking for a face that wasn't there. And Daniel watched the exact moment his daughter found the empty seat and adjusted, not collapsed, not a public display. Just a small private recalibration, something folding quietly inward, a door going gently shut. The same door that had taken 3 years to locate and months more to open. He did not move. He did not let anything show on his face. Because Lily was on that stage and he was going to be the loudest person in this gymnasium when she performed, which was the only thing he could give her from a folding chair. Nicole called that night, wrecked in the precise way of someone who understood exactly what they had done and could not undo it. The board moved the vote. They did it deliberately. They knew I had somewhere to be, and they moved it anyway, and She was looking for you, Daniel said. He kept his voice level. Not because he wasn't furious, not because level was the only register that could do anything useful. The whole time she was on that stage, she was looking for your face in the crowd. She scanned the audience twice, complete silence. Late that night after the phone call, after Lily had gone to bed without asking for a story, the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, Daniel checked on her. The doorway, the nightly check. The light from the hallway falling across the shelf of animals, tallest to shortest, The seated bear in its administrative zone on its square of paper, Lily was awake, lying on her back in the dark, eyes open, staring at the ceiling in the specific way of a child who has been thinking hard about something and has arrived at a question they need answered before they can sleep. Daddy, yeah, baby, is she going to leave? The words count small and flat, and they carried everything underneath them. Like Mom did? Daniel crossed the dark room and sat down on the edge of the bed. He had been in situations that required the kind of steady that most people didn't have the bandwidth for. He had done things in his professional life that demanded calm in the middle of chaos. And he did not have an answer, not a real one. Not the kind Lily deserved. He had built their whole life on the foundation of not lying to her, and the truth right now was that he didn't know, and a promise he couldn't keep would be worse than any hard thing he'd ever had to say. Come here, he said. Lily sat up and leaned into his chest, and he held her, felt how small she still was underneath the enormous intelligence and the operational precision and the regulatory frameworks. Still just a little girl. Still just his. You always answer my questions, she said against his shirt. Even the hard ones. You said you'd always tell me the truth. I know. So tell me the truth. Is she going to leave? He held her eyes. I don't know, Daniel said. That's the truth. I don't know if she's going to be able to stay the way we need her to. Her world is very big right now, and there are people trying to pull her away, and I don't know yet if she's strong enough to say no to them. He held her gaze. But here's what I do know, and I need you to really hear me. Whatever happens with Nicole, it will never, ever be because of anything wrong with you. When your mom left, his voice caught, but he pushed through because she needed this more than she needed him to be composed. That was never about you. Not for one single second. You were 5 years old, and you were perfect, and it was not your fault. And I should have told you that 100 times before now. He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. People leave for their own broken reasons. It is never because the kid wasn't good enough. You are the best thing I've ever done. You hear me? Anyone who can't stay for you is the one who's losing something. Not you, Lily was crying quietly. The way she did everything precisely, privately. But I don't want her to be losing me, Lily whispered. I want her to stay and have me. Why does everybody just leave, Daddy? Why can't somebody just stay? And that question's simple, devastating. From an 8-year-old in the dark broke something open in Daniel Harris that had been sealed shut for 3 years. I don't know, he said, and his voice cracked all the way through. I don't know why people leave, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to stay. I have always stayed, and I will always stay until I'm a very old man and you're completely sick of me. That's a promise I can actually make, because it's mine to make. I know that, Daddy. She said it like the most obvious thing in the world. Like the one fixed star in her sky that had never moved and never would. I've never once worried about you, that the complete unshakable certainty in her voice, the fact that she had never once had to wonder if he would stay undid him in a way that nothing else could have. He held his daughter in the dark until she fell asleep, mid-sentence the way she used to at 3 years old. Laid her down, pulled the blanket up, looked at the shelf one more time, everyone in place, the seated bear in its designated zone, order in a world that kept moving. Then Daniel Harris went into his kitchen and called Nicole Torres at 2 in the morning. She picked up on the first ring. Because of course she did. We have to stop, he said it before she could speak, before she could check on him or apologize again or tell him about the vote timeline. 3 words, flat, final. The voice he used when something was burning and someone needed to not be burning alongside it. Nicole went silent. Not the comfortable kind they'd built across months of Tuesday evenings, the kind that had its own warmth, its own texture, the silence of 2 people who didn't need to fill every space. This was the complete kind. The kind with mass and edges. My daughter is lying in her bed right now asking me if you're going to leave the way her mother did. Daniel's hand was white around the edge of the kitchen counter. She already learned that lesson once, that the people you love disappear when their lives get bigger than the space you occupy in them, and I swore, not out loud, just in the part of me where the real promises live, that she would never learn it twice. Daniel, I watched her on that stage tonight looking for your face in the crowd. I watched her scan the audience twice and find the empty seat, and I watched something close up in her that it took me 3 years to open. His voice dropped but didn't break. Not yet. I will not stand here and let that happen in slow motion because two grown adults couldn't bring themselves to end something that was already ending. It's not ending, raw. Stripped. The vote is next week. Once it's done, I can restructure my schedule. There's always a next week. He closed his eyes. The refrigerator hummed. The microwave clock read to 11 a.m. That's the whole thing, don't you see it? There's always one more vote, one more emergency, one more situation that needs handling before things can be different. The life gets bigger one crisis at a time, and nobody chooses it deliberately. And one day the phone rings during her birthday, and you take the call because thousands of people's jobs depend on you taking it. And that's not a villain's, that's just the arithmetic of the life you built. And I love you too much to keep letting her pay the interest on it. She was crying now, quietly. He could hear it in the breath better of her sentence, the same controlled way Lily cried, the same private precision, and hearing it nearly killed him because he knew what it cost her. So this is you holding the door open, Nicole said, her voice steadier than her breathing. One more time. Standing there telling me to walk through it, and calling it protection. It is protection. Don't tell me it's for my sake. Something sharpened underneath the grief. Not anger, clarity. Have the courage to say it plainly. Say you're scared, and there it was. The thing he'd been building the sentence around. The actual truth inside all the other true things. Of course I'm scared. Quieter now. Aware of Lily asleep down the hall. I have been scared since the night you sat down at my table. I knew the math didn't work. I knew what you were and what I was, and I let myself fall anyway, because you made me feel like an actual person again, and I was selfish. And I let Lily fall too. And now she's the one paying for my selfishness. He stopped. Started again. Both things can be true at the same time. I can be scared and I can be right. What if, Nicole said, protecting her and having me aren't opposites? Silence. What if you've spent 3 years building a wall around that little girl and telling yourself it was love, when the thing the wall is actually teaching her is that when it gets hard, you leave first. You end it clean to avoid the pain. Her voice cracked, held. Right now, tonight, on this phone call, you are the one about to walk out the door, not me. I am not going anywhere. You're the one trying to get ahead of the hurt so it lands on your terms, and she will learn that. She will learn it the way children learn everything their parents do, not from what you tell her, but from what she watches you choose. Daniel stood in the dark kitchen, and Nicole was right. He had seen it. He had been so completely armored certain the wall was protection. Ending things clean and early was the responsible option, the one that hurt least, the one that kept Lily safe from the specific pain of a slow goodbye. But the wall he'd built to keep Lily from watching someone leave was the same wall that would teach her, in the marrow of her bones, that when something became difficult, you preempted the pain by causing it yourself first, that you didn't stay and fight for things. That love was a provisional arrangement subject to revocation when the circumstances got complicated enough. He had been teaching her that, without knowing it. For 3 years, I don't know how, Daniel said. His voice had gone down to almost nothing. That's the truth of it. I don't know how to do this without one of us getting hurt. And the one I can't watch get hurt is 8 years old. Neither do I. Nicole's voice was quiet now, finding its footing. I've never done this. I ran from my marriage into my company because the company was a structure I could control, and a person was not. I have spent 20 years choosing things I could predict over people I couldn't. A breath. You are not the only one who built a wall, Daniel. Mine is just constructed out of money and conference room instead of discipline and duty rosters. A pause that held both of them. We built the same wall, for the same reason, so let's stop building it. Let's be two people who don't know how, figuring it out together, instead of two people who ran separately and spent the rest of their lives absolutely certain they did the responsible thing. Don't hang up, she said. Whatever you do, don't hang up this phone. Because if you hang up, we both go back to our walls, and we spend the rest of our lives safe and alone, and completely convinced we made the right choice. And I would burn everything I have there down to the foundation before I watched us do that. He stood in his kitchen for a long moment. Stay on the phone with me, Nicole said. Just stay, until the sun comes up. Can you do that? Can you just not hang up? Daniel Harris, who had spent 3 years being the only person in any room who stayed, who had never once let anyone help him carry the weight, who had made a career and a life and a whole parenting philosophy out of the singular discipline of showing up alone, sat down slowly on his kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, linoleum cold through his jeans, phone pressed to his ear, and he did the hardest and bravest thing he had ever done, which was nothing at all, except staying on the line. Yeah, he said. I can stay on the phone, and they stayed. Two people who didn't know how on a phone line at 2:11 in the morning in November in Charlotte, North Carolina. Not fixing anything, not solving anything, not making promises they couldn't keep. Just refusing, for the first time in either of their lives, to be the one who hung up first. She texted at 6:47 the next morning, when the kitchen was still grey and the coffee was just beginning to run, and Daniel was on the couch where he'd eventually moved from the cold floor. Give me until the vote. I'll show you what I choose. Not tell you, show you. That's a promise I can keep, he agreed, because after a night refusing to hang up, agreeing to wait was the smallest thing he had left to offer. But the 4 days that followed were their own specific kind of difficult. He couldn't turn on his phone without finding her name in 3 different contexts. Empire in turmoil. Torres under pressure. Is she losing her edge? Financial analysts on television talked about her focus and her judgment and her recent personal entanglements as if those words, personal entanglements, were a clinical diagnosis. And every time they said it, Daniel knew they meant him. Mean Lily. Mean to soccer sideline and a bounce house and 11 gift-wrapped boxes in identical paper and a little girl who had a regulatory zone for seated animals. He wanted to put his fist through the screen approximately 4 times a day. He didn't. He had a daughter. He had a reputation to maintain with himself. Stephen came home on the 3rd night with a 6-pack and the wisdom to not say very much at first. They sat in the air garage the way they'd been sitting it in garages since Fort Jackson. Stephen on an overturned bucket, Daniel on the rolling stool, the Silverado between them like a neutral third party that had witnessed everything and would say nothing. You could call her, Stephen said. She asked for a week. It's the first thing she's asked me for. In 8 months, Daniel turned his beer without opening it. I'm not going to fail the one thing, and if the vote goes the wrong way, then the vote goes the wrong way, and Lily and I will be okay. We were okay before he set the beer down, but I don't think she's going to choose the company. That scares me almost more than if she did. Why? Because if she gives it up, if she does that, for us then it's real and it's permanent and it's on me and Lily to be worth it every single day for the rest of our lives. He shook his head. How does anybody be worth someone dismantling 20 years of their life? How do you carry that without it becoming its own kind of weight? Stephen was quiet for a moment that was actually quiet. Then, maybe you're thinking about it backwards. Maybe she's not dismantling it for you. Maybe she's been trying to get out from under it for years, and you gave her the first reason she's ever had to actually do it. He set his own beer down. You keep acting like you're a debt she's paying. What if you're the first thing in 20 years that made her want to stop paying everyone else? Daniel didn't have an answer for that. He turned it over and kept turning it. Saturday came. He watched the news all morning. Nothing by noon. Nothing by 2 o'clock except analysts speculating and cameras pointed at a glass building 3 hours away, the machinery of a story waiting for its ending. At 3 o'clock, Lise came in from her room and stood in front of the television. Is that her building? Yeah, baby. That's where she works. Lily looked at all those windows. All that glass. Is she okay? Some people at her company are trying to make things difficult for her. Today's the day they find out if they can. Lily processed this the way she processed everything important thoroughly, from multiple angles, arriving at her own conclusions on her own schedule. Then she said the thing that made Daniel have to set down his coffee mug and look at the wall for a few seconds. I hope she wins, Lily said. Even if she can't come back to us, I hope she wins anyway, because she's my friend, and I want good things for her even if I don't get to keep her. Then she walked back to her room. An 8-year-old who had just demonstrated more grace under the weight of loss than most adults managed on their best days. The door closed quietly behind her. Daniel sat alone in the living room with his hand over his mouth. At 4:07 p.m., the doorbell rang. He checked the window first. The photographers had mostly thinned out, but the habit was installed now. No cameras, no equipment, Just a silver SUV in the driveway, the one Nicole drove herself, and a woman standing on his front step in a canvas jacket with her hair slightly less than perfect and a manila folder in her hand. She looked like she'd aged a year in 4 days. The honest assessment. The specific exhaustion of someone who had been in rooms designed to make her smaller for 96 hours straight. Her coat was rumpled at one shoulder. A few strands of hair had escaped at her temples and hadn't been corrected. She was smiling. Small, cracked, genuine, the kind of smile on the other side of something very hard. "You didn't call," Daniel said. "You told me to show you." She held up the folder. "Not tell you. So I came to show you. The vote, what happened, did you? May I come in?" She said it carefully, holding her expression steady. "It's a long story and I'd rather tell part of it sitting down. And I'd very much like to tell some of it to Lily. If she'll see me." Her voice caught on, "if she'll see me." And in that catch, Daniel understood everything about the last 4 days. This woman who had walked into boardrooms without hesitation for 20 years. Standing on his front step, still uncertain whether an 8-year-old would still open her arms. "Lily," Daniel called, not moving his eyes from Nicole, "baby. Come here." Someone's at the door, the bedroom door. Footsteps in the hallway. Lily appeared at the far end and took in the figure standing in the doorway. One moment of complete stillness. Then Lily ran, not slowly, not cautiously, full speed, both feet, no hesitation, straight across the living room floor like a decision that had already been made. Nicole dropped the folder on the front step and caught her. Went down on both knees right there in the doorway and caught the little girl who had crossed the room like gravity and held on. Lily was crying. "You came back. You came back. Everybody said maybe you wouldn't and you came back." And Nicole held her and said, "I came back, I'm here, I'm so sorry about the recital, I'm so sorry." And she said it over and over, each repetition slightly steadier than the one before, until Lily's breathing slowed from panic into something that was the physical shape of relief. Daniel stood in his own doorway and could not have produced a coherent sentence for anything in the world. When they finally came apart, Lily pulling back to look at Nicole's face, verifying the fact of her, the directness of a child who needed visual confirmation, Nicole wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Her composure was gone entirely, not misplaced, not temporarily set aside, gone. And she'd never looked more like a person and less like a CEO than she did right now. Kneeling on the front with tears on her face and frosting from 4 weeks ago, still a memory in the canvas jacket. "I need to talk to your dad about some very boring grown-up things," Nicole told Lily. "But then, if he says it's okay, I would very much like to stay for dinner. And I need you to explain the neck theory to me one more time, because I have been thinking about it for 4 days, and I still cannot locate my error." "The neck doesn't count," Lily said immediately, still half crying, already indignant. "I've told you this. It's structural versus decorative. The giraffe's neck is decorative. The bear's legs are structural. You measure structural length only. Structural versus decorative," Nicole repeated, making the face of someone taking careful notes. "I'll draw you another diagram," Lily said, and with the speed of a child who had already processed the emotional content of the scene and was ready to advance to logistics. She extracted herself, announced she was going to set the table, and disappeared toward the kitchen. The sounds of cabinet doors followed. Daniel looked at the folder on the front step, picked it up. "Tell me what this is," he said. "Plain language, no legal. Open it." He opened it. "Dense, official," he read. Got 3 paragraphs in and looked up. "You didn't resign?" "No, Nicole, this." He looked back down. "Read it again." "This isn't a resignation. Turn to page 2. He turned the page and stopped breathing normally for a moment. "What I did," Nicole said, her voice finding its footing, "was walk into that boardroom this morning with the full board present. The men who had been scheduling conflicts against my personal calendar, moving votes to force me to choose, timing a board session against a child's school recital." Her voice was steady now, not the performance of steadiness, the actual thing. "I told them they were right, that I had shifted my focus." Daniel looked up, and then I told them exactly where I'd shifted it, and why. And I named what they'd been doing: the manufactured conflicts, the vote move to steal a child's evening, the deliberate campaign to erode my position by attrition. I said it plainly. In the room, on the record, in front of all of them. And then I put a resolution on the table they hadn't seen coming. I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations, transitioning to executive chair strategic oversight, board governance, long-term direction, not operational management, not the day-to-day grind that had been eating every hour I had. She nodded toward the page in his hands. I named my own successor, Richard Ashworth. I've been preparing him for 2 years without telling anyone. By the time they understood what was happening, it was already documented and filed. They wanted me out of the operational seat, fine. I moved, but I moved on my timeline, in the structure I chose with the person I selected. They got the transition they asked for. They just didn't get to be the ones who decided when or how. Daniel looked at the document, read the structure of it. What it actually said when you passed through the formal language, that she kept her seat at the level that mattered, freed herself from the operational grind and executed the whole thing before the board could claim credit for it. You outmaneuvered them. I gave them what they said they wanted, Nicole said, before they could use it as leverage. There's a difference. Something came into her expression, not triumph, because triumph was wrong for what happened when you outran a trap built specifically for you. More like clarity. The specific clarity of a person who has stopped running from something and turned around to face it instead. Now turn to page 3, she said. He turned the page, a foundation, self-funded. The initial endowment was a number that made him read it twice. Then he read the purpose statement and his chest did something that wasn't quite pain and wasn't quite relief and was entirely unexpected for single parents. Families' one paycheck from the edgy. Emergency housing support, childcare subsidies, wraparound services for parents doing it alone, the invisible ones, the ones no system was built to catch before they fell, the ones who were one car repair from losing the apartment, one missed shift from losing everything, one bad month from a spiral that took years to climb out of. The Nathan Coles of the world, the document said. He read it a third time. I know how money moves through systems, Nicole said. I know how to build organizations that run at scale. I know how to make something last. And I have spent 8 months sitting across a diner table from a man who learns to braid hair from a midnight video because his daughter's dignity matters more than his sleep. And I have been thinking about how many of him there are. Her voice was different now, lit from the inside, not performing conviction, actually feeling it, millions. Parents doing it completely alone, invisible to every system built by people who have never had to choose between the electric bill and the grocery run. One car repair from losing stability they spent years building. Nicole, this isn't me burning my life down for a mechanic and his daughter. She looked at him. She lit steadily. This is me finally pointing what I know how to do at something that deserves it. The company was never going to hold my hand when I'm old. The company was never going to explain tooth fairy logistics to a child at 9 o'clock on a school night. It was a beautiful, enormous chicken cage I built myself and called it a choice for 20 years. She stepped closer. You didn't cost me my life, Daniel. You showed me I had been living in a cage. There's a difference, and I need you to hear it. Because I'm not going to spend the rest of my days with a man who thinks he's a sacrifice I made, who carries the weight of that every morning when he wakes up. Her voice was firm. You didn't cost me anything. You showed me what I'd been missing. And then you had the decency to not ask me to choose, which meant when I chose it was actually mine. Daniel stood in the doorway with the folder open in his hands and could not speak for a moment. You should have called me, he finally managed. 4 days. I spent 4 days thinking you might choose the company. I told you I'd show you, quiet, certain, not tell you. Because you said it yourself the very first night that people always said they'd give it all up and they never actually did. So I wasn't going to say it. I was going to do it and then stand on your doorstep with the documentation in my hand so you would never, not once, have to wonder whether I meant it. She reached up and touched his face. I'm not a woman who makes promises out loud and hopes you'll believe them. I'm a woman who restructures her professional life and drives herself to your house on a Saturday afternoon with a manila folder. That's the only kind of staying I know how to do, the kind that leaves a paper trail from the kitchen with the supreme impatience of a child who had processed the emotional scene and was ready to move forward. Are you guys done being boring yet? I set 4 plates. There's nothing to eat but the plates are set, and Nicole still needs the diagram. 4? Daniel called. I called Grandma Dorothy. She's bringing pie. Nicole looked at him. Yeah, he said. That's her, but he didn't move yet, because there was one more thing. The thing that had been sitting at the bottom of everything else since the night on the kitchen floor. You need to understand something before you come in here and sit down at that table. He kept his voice level, steady, the way he made everything he intended to keep. If you walk through that door tonight, if you sit down with her, and she hands you the rest of what she's been holding back, there is no undo button on that. She's already given you more than I knew she had left. After tonight, there's nothing held in reserve. You saw her run across that room just now, and there's nothing left to give you cautiously. He met her eyes. So I need you to be sure. Nicole looked at him for a long moment. I have made billion-dollar decisions, she said, with less certainty than I feel standing in this doorway. She took his hand. Take me in, even if there's nothing to eat, especially if there's nothing to eat. I've got the rest of my life and no board meeting to be at, and nowhere else on this earth I'm supposed to be right now. She paused, and something moved through her voice, something she was still adjusting to, like a person stepping into sunlight after a long time indoors. Do you know what that feels like? To have nowhere else you're supposed to be. I'd genuinely forgotten. I had completely forgotten what it felt like. The three of them figured out dinner together. Daniel cooked. Nicole chopped vegetables with the focused ineptitude of someone attempting a new skill at speed, and Lily stood beside her, providing corrections in real time with the patient authority of a child who had absorbed Daniel's knife technique through proximity and was now passing it on to someone who clearly needed the help. Not like that. Curl your fingers, like a claw. Daddy showed me. Like a claw, Nicole repeated, adjusting her grip, tongue between her teeth. Better. Slower, though. Speed comes after accuracy. That's a rule. That's a good rule, Nicole said. I know, Lily said. Dorothy arrived at 5:40 with a she claimed she'd made days ago, and it was simply bringing over because it needed to be consumed, not for any other reason. And nobody was going to make anything of it. She set it on the counter, looked at Nicole at the cutting board with a claw grip and flour on her sleeve, looked at Lily supervising with her arms crossed, looked at Daniel at the stove, said nothing for a moment. Then she picked up a knife and started on the potatoes. The kitchen was loud and small and imperfect, and smelled like something that was actually cooking. And at one point Lily knocked a measuring cup off the counter, and Nicole caught it before it hit the ground. And Lily said, "Nice cat," and Nicole said, "Thank you. I played volleyball briefly in college." And Lily said, "Was that before or after you learned about necks?" And Nicole said, "Long before." And Lily shook her head at the wasted years. Halfway through dinner, Daniel's phone buzzed. Stephen. He answered it because the third call in 4 minutes usually indicated something. "Well?" Stephen's voice barely contained. "What happened? Is she there?" "She's in my kitchen," Daniel said, learning to chop vegetables. "My daughter is correcting her grip technique. A pause of significant length. She's there right now?" "Yeah, and the news is saying there are reports that she transitioned to executive chair and started a foundation for single-parent families." Daniel paused, and she drove herself here. Another pause. Longer. "I want to be best man," Stephen said, and his voice was doing something complicated and not entirely controlled. "You can be best man." A sound on the other end that was Stephen Webb, who had served 2 tours and once changed a tire in a hailstorm without complaint, trying very hard to maintain his composure and not entirely succeeding. "I set up that blind date," Stephen said. "The one that got cancelled. The one that put you in that booth that night. I know, Stephen. I just want it formally on record that I am the foundational cause of good night, Stephen, best man, non-negotiable. I want it in writing." Daniel hung up. Nicole looked up from the cutting board. "Stephen, he wants formal acknowledgement." "He deserves it," Nicole said entirely seriously. "We should send him something. Don't tell him that. He'll have it framed, Dorothy, from the far end of the counter without looking up. He was always a very loud boy, but a good one." And Lily, who had been listening to the entire exchange, wins with the focused attention of a child filing information for future reference. "Can Uncle Stephen come next time?" And Nicole said yes before Daniel had the chance to answer, and Lily looked satisfied. And Dorothy made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. And Daniel stood at the stove in his small kitchen on a Saturday evening in September and thought about how a room could be the exact right size for the number of people in it. After dinner, after Dorothy's pie had been distributed and praised, and 2 pieces had been consumed by Lily under what Dorothy called supervised portion conditions, Nicole found a dish towel and started on the dishes without being asked. Dorothy appeared beside her with another towel and dried without comment. They worked in silence for a few minutes, the comfortable kind. The kind that existed between people who had decided without discussing it that they could be in the same room without explaining themselves. Then Dorothy said, still drying. He learned to braid her hair. Duh, did he tell you that? He told me, Nicole said. YouTube videos. Midnight. For 2 months, he was terrible at it. She looked like she'd been through something. Dorothy set a dried plate on the stack. He never complained. Never mentioned it unless I asked. Just kept watching the videos and getting better. Nicole was quiet. That's who he is, Dorothy said. In case you were still taking the measure, I know who he is, Nicole said. That's why I'm here. Dorothy looked at her once, sideways, the way she looked at everything that mattered. Good, she said, and went back to drying. That was Daniel would think later, the moment his mother decided. Not provisionally. Not pending further evaluation. Actually decided from Dorothy's Harris. This was the whole thing. The storm finished on its own schedule, the way storms always did. For 2 more weeks there were follow-up stories, analysis pieces, the machinery of a narrative trying to find the ending it had expected. Masterstroke or madness. Some analysts called Nicole's transition brilliant. Others called it capitulation. Financial journalists spent considerable energy trying to locate the scandal and kept arriving at the same unsatisfying conclusion. There wasn't one. A woman had restructured her company on her own terms and started a foundation. A man had refused every interview and every buyout the tabloids dangled. A little girl was apparently doing well in 3rd grade. This was not the story anyone had set out to cover. Eventually the cameras drifted toward fresher wounds, as cameras did, and the 3 of them were left in the quiet of an ordinary life, which was the thing both Daniel and Nicole had wanted and neither had entirely believed they'd get to keep. The foundation launched 3 months later. Nicole did it without ceremony. A Tuesday morning, of course a Tuesday, she opened the doors and started helping people. No gala, no press release timed for maximum coverage, no red carpet moment, just an office and a staff and a clear understanding of what needed doing, and a woman who knew how to build things that lasted. The first family she helped herself was a single father of 2 in Mecklenburg County, who was 17 days from losing his apartment. She drove there alone. No assistant, no photographer, nothing to document the moment, except the fact of it. She sat at his kitchen table the way she had learned to sit, fully present, actually there, listening the way Nicole Torres listened when she decided something was worth listening to. And then she quietly made the crisis stop. She came home that evening and sat at Daniel's kitchen table for a long time. When he asked what was going on, she said, I spent 20 years feeling important. Today I felt useful. I didn't know those were different things. She paused. Her voice went somewhere quieter. I was starving for useful. I just didn't know what to call it. They didn't rush anything after that. This surprised people who were still paying attention, which was fewer each week. They didn't merge households overnight or make announcements or move at the speed of a resolution. Nicole kept her own apartment smaller than anything she'd lived in since her late 20s. A deliberate choice. A physical act of recalibration, and she came to dinner most evenings and to every soccer game and every school event, and every Tuesday, same booth, same Harlows. Except that now Patty saved it for both of them without being asked, and the reserved card was always there when they arrived, and nobody ever discussed the arrangement because the arrangement understood itself. Lily's reading level went up again. Her front teeth came in. She added a fox to the stuffed animal collection ambiguous height status due to tail length, which introduced a new category of regulatory complexity that required 3 evenings of analysis, 2 diagrams, and a written ruling that Nicole co-signed at Lily's formal request. Because official decisions required witnesses, and Nicole had established herself as a reliable one. Daniel learned, slowly and with considerable resistance, the thing that 3 years in the Navy and 3 years of solo parenting had not taught him, to let someone else carry some of it. The first time Nicole quietly handled a car repair, he'd been dreading not announcing it, not making it an event, just taking care of it the way he would have taken care of a problem of hers if he could. His first instinct was to hand the money back. The old pride flaring up. The specific terror of a man who had defined himself by not needing things. Nicole didn't argue, she said. When Lily skinned her knee last month and you cleaned it up and stayed with her until she stopped crying, did she owe you for that? Did you keep a ledger? Of course not. That's what? That's family. Yes, Nicole said. Exactly my point. And she left it there. Daniel carried it around for a few days. Then he set it down. The way you set down something heavy that you've been holding long enough to forget you had a choice about it. Learning to receive care at 34 from a woman who'd had to restructure her entire professional life to learn how to give it was the hardest thing Daniel Harris ever did. Not the deployments, not the divorce, not the 3 years of doing everything alone without complaint. This, opening the hand, letting the weight go somewhere else for once. He was prouder of it than anything. 6 months after the foundation launched, on an unremarkable Saturday morning in early spring, Nicole managed a passable French braid on Lily's hair before school. She photographed it from 4 angles, sent all 4 to Daniel with the message, "Tell me this is good. I need to hear this is good." He wrote back, "That's the best braid I've ever seen in my life." She wrote back, "You're lying." He wrote back, "Yes, but it's good." And Lily went to school with a braid that was genuinely competent if not yet elegant and Nicole spent the rest of the morning slightly euphoric in a way she hadn't felt after closing a deal in years. 18 months after the night she sat down across from him in Harlow's diner. The wedding was in Dorothy Harris's backyard. Nicole's choice. She could have had anything: Cathedral Vineyard, a venue that would have required a waiting list and a guest list that read like an index. She wanted the backyard. The same backyard where she'd inflated a bounce house and stayed until every dish was clean and Dorothy had decided, in Dorothy's oblique and definitive way, to allow the evaluation to continue. 50 people. The ones who mattered. Dorothy in the front row in a blue dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion and claimed she'd had for years. Stephen in the second row, already emotional before anyone had spoken, which he would have denied if directly confronted. Margaret Holloway, the attorney who had spent 4 weeks extracting Lily's image from every outlet that had published it, holding a glass of champagne with the satisfied expression of a woman who had earned it. Patty, who had not been on the guest list and had shown up anyway with a pie and a card that said "I knew it" that first night, and whom nobody asked to leave because she was right, and everyone in the backyard knew she was right. Stephen's speech started as a comedy about the blind date and ended with Stephen unable to continue because he was crying, which he addressed by holding up one finger, composing himself audibly, saying "I'm fine, I'm absolutely," and then starting again, and then stopping again, while the backyard laughed, and Dorothy handed him a handkerchief she had clearly brought specifically for this purpose, and he took it without argument. And then Lily, 9 years old, standing on a chair so the people in the back could see her, holding a glass of sparkling apple juice with the gravity of someone making a formal address to a full assembly. "I used to be scared that Nicole would leave," Lily said. "Like my first mom did. The backyard went quiet. I asked my dad once if she was going to leave, and he said he didn't know. And that was the scariest night I ever had. Not because I didn't believe him. I believed him. It was scary because it was true. He really didn't know, and I didn't know. And nobody knew." She looked at Nicole, but then she came back. When everybody said she might not, she came back. And she changed how her whole job works, and my dad kept saying she was giving up so much. But I've been thinking about it for a long time." A pause. The careful pause of someone presenting a conclusion they've worked hard to reach. "I don't think she was giving anything up. I think she was just coming home. She just didn't have a home before, and then she found ours, and now it's hers too." Lily raised her glass. "This is my toast to Nicole, who came back, who still doesn't completely understand the neck theory, but that's okay, because now she has the rest of her life to learn it, and I am a very patient teacher." The backyard came apart. Dorothy, openly weeping, not pretending otherwise for the first time Daniel could ever remember. Stephen, a complete wreck, handkerchief deployed, not even trying. Margaret Holloway, pressing her fingers to her mouth. Patty at the back making no attempt at composure whatsoever, holding her pie plate like a life preserver. Nicole climbed up onto the chair beside Lily, put her arm around her, said, loud enough for everyone, for the record, "I have finally understood the neck theory. It took 14 months. She is, as stated, a very patient teacher. The neck does not count. It's structural versus decorative. I have it. You have it," Lily confirmed, beaming. "It only took 14 months. Some concepts take time," Lily said generously. That's so. Laughter and the crying were the same thing for a moment, which was the best condition a backyard could be in. Years passed the way years passed. The foundation grew into something that helped thousands. Then tens of thousands of families, the invisible ones, the ones a paycheck from disaster, caught now before they fell by an organization, run by a woman who understood exactly who they were, because she had sat across a diner table from one of them and paid attention. Nicole never went back to the empire. When reporters asked whether she missed the power, she said the same thing every time. "I have more power now than I ever had. I just finally pointed it at something that mattered." Then she changed the subject to whatever family the foundation had helped that week, because the empire genuinely bored her now and the families never did. Daniel left the Navy when his time was done. and opened a small garage. 2 bays, an honest name over the door, work he was built for. He came home every evening to a house that was full instead of empty. He never used Nicole's money for himself. Not once. He kept the Silverado until it reached 241,000 miles and mourned it when it finally died, the way you mourned a thing that had been there for the whole middle of the story. Lily Grupp's rare daddy and brave and generous still. The girl who stepped between the bully and the smaller kid, still doing the math about what she could afford to lose, so someone else wouldn't have to lose anything. She carried the lesson for the dark night she'd asked her father if Nicole would leave, not as a wound but as a compass. Not people leave, the opposite. That love was worth staying for. That when it got hard you didn't look for the exit. That the bravest thing 2 people could do was refuse to be the one who hung up first. She watched her father learn to receive help. She watched a woman dismantle her own fortress to prove a point that didn't need words. She grew up understanding in her bones what it looked like when people chose each other not once, in a grand gesture, but daily, in the 10,000 small unglamorous acts of showing up for the thing you'd decided was worth showing up for. When she was grown, and someone asked her about her family, she thought about it with the seriousness she'd once brought to the structural versus decorative height problem. "We're not perfect," she said. "My dad's stubborn in ways that used to drive me crazy and probably still do. My mom, my second mom, the one who chose us, she still works too much sometimes, and we have to drag her away from the foundation on vacations. We fight, we get things wrong, but we show up. Every single day, no matter what, everybody shows up. That's the whole thing. Not that we're perfect, that we're present." Daniel Harris lived a long life, full and loud and the opposite in every dimension of the quiet, dutiful, lonely errands he had settled himself into on a cold November Tuesday in a diner that smelled of burnt coffee and something sweet underneath. His hand was held when he was old, by the woman who had told him, the first night they talked, that there was not enough money in the world to buy what he had. She'd been right. She hadn't tried to buy it. She had restructured her entire professional existence and driven herself to his house on a Saturday afternoon and handed him a manila folder and waited on his front step to see whether an 8-year-old would run across the living room. And then she'd spent the rest of her life earning it back, one ordinary day at a time. But all of that was still ahead of them on the evening it became real, the evening Nicole stood in his doorway with documentation and a foundation and the whole complicated truth of herself held out in both hands. And Daniel had taken her hand and walked her into a kitchen where his daughter had set 4 plates for a dinner that hadn't been cooked yet, and Dorothy Harris was already parking her car in the driveway with a pie. He sat down at that small table, between the 2 people who were the whole of what his life had been building toward, without his knowing it was building toward anything. He looked at the empty plates, at the pie on the counter, at the woman who had turned down every version of simple and chosen the complicated one on purpose. He reached out and took both their hands, bowed his head, and said grace over food that wasn't there yet, in a house that was full, at a table that was finally, permanently, exactly what it was supposed to be. His voice didn't shake, because for the first time in his adult life he wasn't holding anything alone. The table was full, the family was real, and nothing in the world was going to put him back in that booth by the window, with a cold cup of coffee and a sugar packet folded into eighths. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, with exactly the people he was supposed to be with a store. And that was the truth no headline could touch, no board could vote on, and no amount of money could ever have bought. They had built it themselves, brick by brick, day by day, by showing up, and it would never disappear. Have you ever shown up completely and had someone finally show up back? Tell us in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you tonight, share it with someone who needs to hear that showing up is never wasted.